We've all heard of Pepsi. It's been quenching thirsts for decades. But what you might not know is that Pepsi was once, very briefly, a military powerhouse. They ended up selling their submarines for scrap, but yeah, it still happened. If you want to know more about why we have goosebumps, the origins of the hamburger, or even how to win a debate every single time, watch on. Here are 20 random facts. Let's go. Sweden's cheese game is strong, and now it seems like we've cracked the code. All you gotta do is scream at your cheese. In the 17th century, Swedish cheesemakers believed that yelling during the curdling process would result in a firmer, better quality cheese. They were convinced that the vibrations and intensity of their voices somehow improved the texture. Some farms even had built-in dedicated spaces where cheesemakers would yell at rows of curdling cheese without distraction. And while there's no scientific proof behind it, the practice of torturing cheese was taken pretty seriously at the time. Pepsi, the sugary drink brand we all know and love, was once the sixth largest military power in the world, at least on paper. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union was a little bit short on cash, so they got creative. They traded a fleet of warships, including 17 submarines, a cruiser, and a destroyer, for $3 billion worth of Pepsi. The company became a naval powerhouse overnight, with more firepower than a small nation. But it didn't last long. They ended up selling it all for scrap. Turns out, world domination wasn't part of their business model. Why do we get goosebumps? Those little bumps that pop out of our skin when the chill sets in. It's actually a leftover survival reflex from our much hairier, much more ape-like ancestors. Back then, tiny muscles at the base of each hair would contract in response to cold or fear, causing the hair to stand on end. This served a dual purpose. It helped them trap heat and puff them up so they'd look more intimidating to predators. But these days, goosebumps don't really serve any purpose at all. They're just a leftover biological relic from a much hairier time. In competitive debate, there's a controversial tactic known as spreading. The name is a blend of the words speed and reading. It involves peppering your opponent with as many rapid fire arguments as possible in the shortest amount of time, in the hope that they won't be able to respond to every point. The goal isn't to build strong arguments, but to overwhelm with sheer volume. By the end, there's a good chance no one really knows what just happened, only that someone technically won. You've probably heard that cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. Well, it doesn't. That's a myth. Multiple studies and decades of research have found no connection between knuckle cracking and joint issues. The popping sound isn't bones grinding or snapping, it's caused by gas bubbles rapidly collapsing in the synovial fluid, the liquid inside your joints. When you stretch or bend your fingers, the pressure in the joints drops, forming a bubble that quickly bursts. So yeah, cracking knuckles hurts ears more than joints. The next time you're chowing down on a juicy, cheesy hamburger, don't forget to thank North Korea. This is probably where you ask what the hell I'm on about. Well, according to their state media, they invented it. It was apparently created by the supreme leader himself, but they didn't call it a hamburger. They went with a more no frills, double bread with meat. It was developed to improve the lives of university students, one revolutionary food item at a time. Collective nouns. Some of them are just completely outrageous. I mean, if you step outside and spot a group of flamingos, that's called a flamboyance. Or even a bunch of porcupines, you've got yourself a prickle. And jellyfish? It's not a swarm or school or something a reasonable person would expect. It's a smack of jellyfish. Come on, smack of jellyfish. Why? So, on a bit of a side note, I really went down a rabbit hole with this one. I mean, here's some more. You've got an unkindness of ravens, a conspiracy of lemurs, a dazzle of zebras, a crash of rhinos, a shiver of sharks, and my favorite, an embarrassment of pandas. I could literally go on all day. Vending machines aren't a modern invention. They've actually been around for thousands of years. In fact, they date all the way back to ancient Egypt. And guess what the world's first vending machine dispensed? Holy water. You'd drop a heavy bronze disc into the coin slot, and the weight would tip a lever inside. This opened a valve and released a measured splash of the sacred stuff. Once the coin slid off, the valve closed, an ingenious way to prevent people from taking more than their fair share. And we move on to the first computer virus ever created, the Creeper. Written in the early 1970s by Bob Thomas, a pioneering computer programmer, Creeper wasn't designed to harm. It was designed to test the feasibility of programs moving across a network autonomously. Basically, they wanted to see if a program could jump between computers on its own. And it worked. Creeper successfully infiltrated machines through ARPANET, the early version of the internet. And while it wasn't harmful, it did send a cheeky message. I'm the Creeper, catch me if you can. It paved the way for modern computer viruses and led to the previously unexplored field of cyber security. In Botswana, a 2020 study uncovered a surprisingly simple way to protect cattle from predators. Paint eyes on their butts. Researchers worked with over 2,000 cattle across 14 herds, painting eyes on a third, simple cross marks on another third, and leaving the rest unmarked. After 4 years, none of the 683 cattle with painted eyes were killed, while 15 unmarked cattle were. Pretty creative, but I really wouldn't want to be the artist. In the early 15th century, King Charles VI of France suffered from a rare psychological condition. He thought he was made of glass. It's not all that common today, but this bizarre disorder, known as glass delusion, was surprisingly well documented during the Middle Ages, particularly among nobles and elites. Those affected thought they were made entirely of fragile glass, convinced that any touch or sudden movement would cause them to break. Charles took extreme precautions. He wore specially padded quilted garments, refused all physical contact, and avoided sitting down unless there was a soft cushion carefully inspected beforehand to absorb any accidental impact. I mean, I've heard of buns of steel, but glass? Come on. Forget everything you know about Vikings. Well, not everything, just the bit about the horned helmets. Despite popular belief, there's no historical evidence that Vikings ever wore them. So when we think about Vikings, why do we picture them with those spiky metal tubs on their heads? Well, it all started with 19th century operas, where costume designers added horns for dramatic flair. In reality, Viking helmets were a bit more practical, usually rounded iron caps, sometimes with a nose guard, but minus the horns. It's got to be one of the most versatile adhesives around. You'll find it on everything from kids' shoes to spacesuits. I'm talking about the wonder that is Velcro. It all started back in 1941 with a Swiss engineer and his dog. He returned from a hike in the Swiss Alps to find his dog covered in those clingy, annoying burrs. Curious, he examined them under a microscope and discovered tiny hooks had latched onto loops in the hair. And after years of tinkering, he finally cracked the code, successfully replicating the burr's hook and loop design and naming it Velcro, a combination of the French velours and crochet, English for velvet and hook. Are you overwhelmed by the stresses and demands of daily life? Well, why not check yourself into prison? In South Korea, you actually can. A unique wellness facility offers a fake prison experience, where visitors voluntarily hand over their phones, slip into a prison uniform, and spend up to 24 hours alone in a tiny, silent cell. There's no clocks, no contact, just total isolation. Personally, I'd prefer a cocktail on the beach, but hey, if prison's your thing, I won't judge. Beauty trends back in 18th century England were a little questionable. One of the stranger ones involved wearing fake eyebrows made from actual mouse skin. People's eyebrows often thinned or disappeared entirely, not just from age, but from the heavy use of lead-based cosmetics and mercury-laced skin treatments. So, in response, wig makers began selling small patches of mouse hide to glue above the eyes as makeshift eyebrows. Yes, actual mouse skin. It was considered fashionable at the time, but nowadays they wouldn't dare. Mouse eyebrows are out, and Botox and Brazilian butt lifts are in. Let's keep going with the mice theme. In the 1960s, researcher John B. Calhoun created a series of experiments known as the mouse Utopia. Mice lived in a controlled environment with unlimited food, water, and no predators. The ultimate stress-free mouse holiday. At first, the population boomed, but as things got crowded, social behavior broke down. Mice became aggressive, stopped mating, and abandoned their young. A generation emerged known as the beautiful ones. These were mice that groomed themselves constantly but withdrew from society completely. Despite the seemingly ideal conditions, the whole population eventually died out. Calhoun called it the behavioral sink, a jarring warning about the effects of overcrowding. If you're heading to Sweden anytime soon, why not make a detour to the Disgusting Food Museum? As the name suggests, it's an entire museum dedicated to some of the world's most stomach-churning and controversial culinary creations. Once inside, you'll stumble upon fermented shark from Iceland, maggot-infested cheese from Italy, and even beer brewed from a part of a bull. You definitely don't want it to be brewed from. Visitors can see, smell, and in some cases even taste these questionable dishes. And they've even thought of everything. I mean, an entry ticket that doubles as a sick bag. Ingenious. Have you ever heard of the Salmon Cannon? Don't worry, neither had I. And no, it's not some top secret military project. True to its name, it's literally a cannon that shoots salmon. During their natural migration, salmon often run into man-made obstacles like dams. So scientists came up with an unusual but effective solution. They decided to just launch them over the dam. The fish get sucked into a long, flexible tube, fired through the air, and land safely on the other side to continue their journey like nothing ever happened. Many believe dancing is a stress reliever. But this wasn't always the case, particularly in 14th century Europe. This was the era of the bizarre phenomenon known as dancing manias, where groups of people would begin dancing uncontrollably in the streets, sometimes for days on end. They weren't dancing by choice, they were simply unable to stop. The result was mass exhaustion. People ended up collapsing and died. And while no one knows the exact cause, the leading theory is that mass hysteria brought on by extreme stress, famine, and disease led to one of history's strangest public health mysteries. The Voyager Golden Record was NASA's attempt to bridge the gap between humans and extraterrestrial life. Launched in 1977 aboard the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft, two identical gold-plated discs were sent into space, each carrying a curated selection of Earth's sounds, music, and greetings, all in 55 different languages. It had everything from Beethoven's symphonies to random whale noises, intended to act as a sort of cosmic icebreaker if we were to ever stumble upon intelligent alien life. And we're done. So, a little public service announcement. For those of you who stuck around, I'll be taking a short break, just for a couple of weeks. And no, I'm not checking myself into a South Korean prison. It's one of those more conventional holidays. But don't worry, I'll be back in a fortnight with more facts than you can shake a stick at. And fun fact, no one exactly knows where the phrase shake a stick at came from. The leading theory is how shepherds would use their sticks to guide or count sheep. Anyway, it means a lot. Lots of facts. Thanks again for your support. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.